From Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. This is Chapter 7, A Mad Tea Party. There was a table set out under the tree in front of the house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea at it. A dormouse was sitting between them, fast asleep, and the other two were using it as a cushion, resting their elbows on it and talking over its head. Very uncomfortable for the dormouse, thought Alice. It's only asleep. I suppose it doesn't mind. The table was a large one, but the three were all crowded together at one corner of it. No room, no room, they cried as they saw Alice coming. There's plenty of room, said Alice indignantly, as she sat down in a large armchair at one end of the table. Have some wine, said the March Hare in an encouraging tone. Alice looked all around the table, but there was nothing on it but tea. I don't see any wine, she remarked. There isn't any, said the March Hare. Then it isn't very civil of you to offer it, said Alice angrily. It wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited, said the March Hare. I didn't know it was your table, said Alice. It's laid for a great many more than three. Your hair wants cutting, said the Hatter. He'd been looking at Alice for some time with great curiosity, and this was his first speech. You should learn not to make personal remarks, said Alice with some severity. It's very rude. The Hatter opened his eyes very wide on hearing this, but all he said was, Why is a raven like a writing desk? Come, we shall have some fun now, thought Alice. I'm glad they've begun asking riddles. I believe I can guess that, she said aloud. Do you mean that you think you can find out the answer to it? Said the March Hare. Exactly, said Alice. Then you should say what you mean, said the March Hare. I do, Alice hastily replied. At least, I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know. It's not the same thing a bit, said the Hatter. Why, you might just as well say, I see what I eat, is the same as I eat what I see. You might as well say, added the March Hare, that I like what I get is the same as I get what I like. You might as well say, said the Dormouse, which seemed to be talking in sleep, that I breathe when I sleep is the same as I sleep when I breathe. It is the same thing to you, said the Hatter. And here all the conversation dropped, and the party was silent for a minute while Alice thought over all she could remember about ravens and writing desks, which wasn't much. The Hatter was the first to break the silence here. What day of the month is it? He said, turning to Alice, as he had taken out his watch out of his pocket and was looking at it uneasily, shaking it every now and then and holding it to the ear. Alice considered a little bit and then said, The 4th? 2 days wrong, said the Hatter. I told you, butter doesn't suit the works, he said angrily to the March Hare. It was the best butter, said the March Hare. Yes, but some crumbs must have got into its well, the Hatter grumbled. You shouldn't put it in with the bread knife. The March Hare took the watch and looked at it gloomily, and then he dipped it into a cup of tea and looked at it again. But he could not think of anything better than his first remark. It was the best butter, you know. Alice had been looking over her shoulder with some curiosity. What a funny watch, she remarked. It tells the day of the month. It doesn't tell you what o'clock it is. Why should it? Muttered the Hatter. Does your watch tell you what year it is? Of course not, Alice replied very readily. That's because it stays the same year for a much longer time altogether. Which is just the case with mine, said the Hatter. Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. The Hatter's remark seemed to her to be have no sort of meaning in it. Yet it was certainly English. I don't quite understand you, she said as politely as she could. The Dormouse was asleep again, and said the Hatter, as they poured a little hot tea upon its nose. The Dormouse shook its head impatiently, and without opening his eyes, it said, of course, just what I was going to remark myself. Have you guessed the riddle yet? Said the Hatter, turning to Alice again. No, I give up. What's the answer? I haven't the slightest idea, said the Hatter. Nor I, said the March Hare. Alice sighed wearily. I think you might do something better with the time than wasting it asking riddles to which you have no answers. If you knew time as well as I do, said Hatter, you wouldn't talk about wasting it. It's a hymn. I don't know what you mean, said Alice. Of course you don't, said the Hatter, tossing his head contemptuously. I dare say you never even spoke to time. Perhaps not, said Alice cautiously. I know I have to beat time when I learn music. Ah, that accounts for it, said the Hatter. He won't stand beating. Now, if you only kept on good terms with him, he'd almost He'd do almost anything you like with the clock. For instance, suppose it were 9 o'clock in the morning, just time to begin lessons. You'd only have to whisper a hint to time, and round goes the clock in a twinkling, and 1:30, time for dinner. I only wish it was the March Hare who said that to itself in a whisper. That would be grand, certainly, said Alice thoughtfully, but then I shouldn't be hungry for it, you know. Not at first, perhaps, said the Hatter, but you could keep 1:30 for as long as you liked. Is that the way you manage? Alice asked. The Hatter shook his head mournfully and said, Not I, he replied. We quarreled last March, just before he went mad, you know, pointing his teaspoon at the March Hare. It was a great concert given by the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing, Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder where you at. You know that song, perhaps? I've heard something like it, said Alice. It goes, the Hatter continued in this way. Up upon the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle. And here the dormouse shook itself and began to singing in its sleep. Twinkle, 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 twinkle. And it went on so long they had to pinch it to make it stop. Well, I'd hardly finished the first verse, said the Hatter, when the Queen bawled out, He's murdering the time! Off with his head! How dreadfully savage! Exclaimed Alice. And ever since that, the Hatter went on in a mournful tone, he won't do a thing I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now. A bright idea came to Alice's head. It's that Is that the reason so many tea things are out here? She asked. Yes, it is, said the Hatter with a sigh. It's always tea time, and we've no time to wash things between the whiles. Then you keep moving round, I suppose, said Alice. Exactly so, said the Hatter, as the things get used up. But what happens when you come to the beginning again? Alice ventured to ask. I suppose we change the subject, the March Hare interrupted, yawning. Oh, I'm tired of this. I vote the young lady tells us a story. I'm afraid I don't know one, said Alice, rather alarmed at the proposal. Then the dormouse shall, they both cried. Wake up the dormouse, and they pinched it on both sides at once. The dormouse slowly opened its eyes and said, I wasn't asleep. It was a hoarse, feeble voice. Every word you fellows are saying. Tell us a story, said the March Hare. Yes, please do, pleaded Alice. And be quick about it, added the Hatter, or you'll be asleep again before it's done. Once upon a time, there were 3 little sisters, the Dormouse began in a great hurry. Their names were Elsie, Lacey, and Tilly, and they lived at the bottom of a well. And what did they live on? Asked Alice, who always had great interest in questions about eating and drinking. They lived on treacle, said the Dormouse, after thinking a minute or two. They couldn't have done that, you know, Alice gently remarked. They'd have all been ill. So they were, said the Dormouse, very ill. Alice tried a little to fancy herself what an extraordinary way of living that would be, but it puzzled her too much. And she went on, but why did they live at the bottom of a well? Take some more tea, said the March Hare to Alice very earnestly. I've not had nothing yet, Alice replied in an offended tone, so I can't very well take more. You mean you can't very well take less, said the Hatter. It's easy to take more of anything. Nobody asked for your opinion, said Alice. What about who's making personal remarks now? The Hatter asked triumphantly. Alice did not know quite what to say to this. She helped herself to some tea and bread and butter, and then turned to the Dormouse and repeated her question. Why did they live at the bottom of a well? The Dormouse again took a minute or two to think about it, and then said, It was a treacle well. There's no such thing, Alice said, beginning very angrily, but then the Hatter and the March Hare went on, Shh, and the Dormouse sulkily remarked, If you can't be civil, you better finish the story for yourself. No, please, please, go on, said Alice very humbly. I won't interrupt you again. I dare say there may be one. What did they draw? Oh, sorry, excuse me. One indeed, said the Dormouse indignantly. However, he consented to go on. And so the 3 little sisters, they were beginning to draw, you know. What did they draw, Alice, quite forgetting her promise? Treacle, said the Dormouse, without considering it at all in time. I want clean cup, interrupted the Hatter. Let's all move one place on. So he moved on as he spoke, and the Dormouse followed him. The March Hare moved into the Dormouse's place, and Alice rather unwillingly took the place of the March Hare. The Hatter was the only one who got any advantage from this change, and Alice was a good deal worse off than before, as the March Hare had just upset a milk jug into his plate. Alice did not wish to offend the Dormouse again, so she began very cautiously. But I don't understand. Where do they draw the treacle from? You can draw water out of a water well, said the Hatter. So you should be able to draw treacle from a treacle well. Huh, stupid? But they were in the well, Alice said to the Dormouse, not choosing to notice the last remark. Of course they were, said the Dormouse. Well in. This answer confused poor Alice that she let the Dormouse go on for some time without interrupting it. They were learning to draw, said the Dormouse. He went on, yawning and rubbing his eyes and getting very sleepily. And they all drew all manners of things. Everything that begins with the letter M. Why M? Said Alice. Why not? Said the March Hare. Alice was silent. Dormouse closed his eyes, and by this time it was going off into a little doze. And then it was pinched again by the Hatter and woke it up with a little shriek, and it went on. That begins with M, such as mouse traps, the moon, the memory, the muchness, and say things much of muchness. Did you ever say things drawing of muchness? Rather now, ask me, said Alice, very confused. I don't think. Then you shouldn't talk, said the Hatter. This piece of rudeness was more than Alice could bear, and she got up in great disgust and walked off. The Dormouse fell asleep again instantly, and neither of the others took least notice of her going, through which she looked back once or twice, half hoping they would call after her. The last time she saw them, they were trying to put the Dormouse into a giant teapot. At any rate, I'll never go there again, said Alice as she picked her way through the wood. That was the stupidest tea party I've ever been to in all my life. Just as she said this, she noticed that one of the trees had a door leading right into it. That's very curious, she thought, but everything's curious today. I think I may well go down into it at once, and she went in. Once more she found herself in the long hall, and close to the little glass table. Now I'll manage better this time, she said to herself, and began by taking the little golden key and unlocking the door that had led into the garden. Then she set to work by nibbling the mushroom that she had kept a piece of it in her pocket till she was about a foot high. And then she walked down the little passage, and then she found herself at last in the beautiful garden among the bright flower beds and cool fountains.